So today we'll be discussing about the remaining portions of module 6. We'll be discussing about what is multiple context processor, what are the various context switching policies. Then we'll discuss about parallelism, various types of parallelism, and we'll see some case studies of fine grained parallel computers also. So let's start with multiple context processors, which is the broad topic of the sixth module. Okay, so talking about the multiple context processor, we have already told that it is capable of handling multiple tasks or multiple contexts at the same time. Then whenever it finds that the current context is waiting for some resources, then it is capable of switching the context and allowing some other task to execute. So such kind of policies are there for multiple context processors. So a multi-threaded processor will suspend the current context and it will switch to another context. So as you know that since we are having this particular strategy, the busy cycles of processor will be more compared to its idle cycles, or you can significantly reduce the idle cycles of the processor, thus providing a better performance. So this is it. So we can count for the efficiency as the total number of busy cycles divided by the total number of cycles, which is where the processor is either in the busy state or is switching the context or even idle. So in the case of a multiple context processor, a processor can be idle only if all the currently executing contexts are waiting for some resources. So if there is such a scenario, then the processor will have to be idle, else it will not be idle, it will be switching to some other context and executing the job. So that is it. So the basic idea of multi-threaded machine is to interleave the execution, which means whenever you have some problem, whenever you are finding that a particular context cannot proceed further without having a particular resource, you can just switch the context, you can interleave the execution, you can give the chance to someone else so that that can be executed, and the currently suspended context can resume its execution when the resource that it has been waiting for is available. So that is about the objective or the basic idea of a multi-threaded machine. Now we have already discussed about what are the various states of a context, or the states that you can represent in a context cycle. So there are four states: ready, running, leaving, and blocked. In the ready state, the context is ready with all the necessary information, all the necessary instructions, all the necessary data to proceed for the execution, but it is not given a chance to execute, or it is waiting for the processor time. Okay, so that is the ready state. In the running state, it will be under execution. So it is the current context under execution, it is being executed, it is given the processor time. Then the third state is the leaving state, or what we can say, the deletion of the context from the main memory. So in that case, the context has successfully executed. It has completed its role. It has completed the task which was given. So you can take it out of the memory, and that state is called leaving. And finally, you have the fourth state, which is the blocked state, where the context is temporarily suspended because it is going to wait for some resource to become available so that it can proceed further. Then talking about various context switching policies that can be applied in a multiple context processors, we have four major policies that you can use while you are having a multiple context processor or a multi-threaded processor. Okay, so these are the four switching policies that are used. First one is switch on every cache miss. So whenever you find a cache miss, the processor will not be giving a chance to go visit the memory and get the data. It will be readily switching the context, and this particular context which was under execution, it will be temporarily kept on hold. So it will have to perform the memory access, it will get the relevant data, and it will go back to the ready state and wait for its turn to be executed. So that is switch on cache miss. Second one is switch on every load. So whenever you have a load instruction, to load means you have to fetch something from the memory. So whenever you find a load operation, or whenever you find an instruction which is asking for a load to happen, then the processor will not be executing that instruction. It will put the context into a waiting state, ask the load to happen in the backend, and this context switching will happen, and some other context will be given a chance to execute. Third one is switch on every instructions, which means whenever you are having a new instruction, the context is switched, so that the instruction fetch, decode, so and so, everything before the execution by the processor will happen in the backend, and the context will be ready for execution. So at the meantime, the processor can execute some other instructions. So that is switch on every instruction. And the last one is switch on some specific blocks of instructions. So you are classifying the instructions into so many blocks, and whenever a new block is to be executed, then the processor will switch the context. So these are the four context switching policies. So talking about each of them in detail, we'll start with the switch on cache miss. So whenever a cache miss occurs, you will have to switch the context. So the average interval between successive misses can be represented using R, and the time taken to satisfy the miss, which means you have to go find the memory, you have to access it, you have to copy it to the primary memory, then you have to copy it to the cache. So that time required to satisfy the miss can be represented as L. So L is kind of the latency, R is the average interval between successive misses. So processor is going to switch the context only when it is certain that the current one will be delayed for a significant number of cycles. So you know what is R, you know what is L. So if you are so sure, if the processor is so sure that for so many number of cycles, it's not just one cycle or two cycle, if it is going to be delayed for a significant number of cycles, then definitely the processor will switch the context. So that is switch on cache miss. Now talking about the second policy, which is switch on every load. So in this case, the policy allows to switch on every load, which means whether it is a miss or not, that is not taken care of here. Whenever you see a load instruction, whether it is actually prefetched or not, the context will be switched. And here R is going to represent the average interval, not between the misses, but between the loads. Switch on every instruction. So whenever you have a new instruction, whether it is a load instruction or store instruction, whatever it is, whenever you are encountering with a new instruction, the context gets switched. So this can be used to interleave the instructions from different threads on a cycle by cycle basis, which means on the first cycle, maybe the first instruction from the thread 1 will be executed. In the second cycle, actually you have to execute a new instruction from the thread 1, but you are not taking it. You are taking the first instruction from thread 2. Then the next cycle, you are taking the second instruction from thread 1. So and so, this is going to happen in an interleaved fashion on a cycle by cycle basis, based on how many threads are going to execute concurrently. So that is switch on every instruction, and if they are independent, then you can have a benefit of pipelined execution. Then last one is switch on block of instructions. So this is to avoid the traffic, or this is to avoid the switching overhead that may occur because of interleaving in every new instructions. So what happens is you are going to take a block of instruction of one particular thread. When that is executed, you switch the context and take one single block from the other thread. So this will be in an interleaved fashion. So the switching overhead can be significantly reduced, and you will have some single context performance to happen. So this is about switching on blocks of instructions. So we have discussed about 4 context switching policies that can be applied for multiple context processors. Now talking about the efficiency in the case of a multiple context processor, when you talk about a single threaded machine, you have to talk about what is R. So R is the amount of time a cycle processor is busy, and the L is the amount of time the processor is idle. So when you talk about a single threaded machine, you can take efficiency as the number of busy cycles divided by the number of total cycles. So that is E1 is equal to, or E single threaded is equal to R divided by R plus L, and it can be reformulated as 1 divided by 1 plus L by R. So that is about the single threaded machine. When you're talking about efficiency of a multi-threaded processor, you have to talk about some regions. Okay, so when you can see the performance, okay, when you see the performance, it can be depicted using a graph like this. Okay, so on the y-axis you can see the efficiency of the processor, the efficiency achieved by the processor, and on the right side you can see the number of contexts. Okay, sorry, on the x-axis you can see the number of contexts, and on the y-axis you can see the processor efficiency. When you plot a graph, you can see that up to a certain level it has got a linear fashion. Okay, up to a certain level it has got a linear fashion, and that region is called linear region. Okay, after that you can see that it is not having a significant growth, it is kind of saturated. So that particular region is called a saturation region. So when you talk about a multi-context processor or a multiple context processor or a multi-threaded processor, it has got two particular performances. One is the performance while it is in the linear region, and the other one is a performance when it is in a saturation region. So you will have to take into account both of them. So memory latency is hidden due to the context switching. Here we are using the multiple context processor for latency hiding. So you cannot apply the latency part here. But there is switching overhead. Okay, since you are going to have context switching, there will be context overhead of context switching. Then as I said, you will have to analyze the efficiency in two regions, in the linear region as well as the saturation region. Now talking about the linear region, as we know, we have seen it has got a linear behavior. It is like of directly proportional to the number of contexts. You can see that in the linear region, as the number of contexts increases, the efficiency also increases. So when the number of contexts is below the saturation point, there may be no ready context after a context switch. So the processor will experience idle cycles, which means if the number of contexts is going to be beyond the saturation level, you cannot say that all the time it will be switching. So at some point you can see that there will not be any more contexts which are ready to be executed. So in that case, the processor will definitely have to be in the idle state. Okay, so the processor may experience idle cycle. So the time required to switch to a ready context, execute it until a remote reference is issued and process the reference is equal to R plus C plus L, where R is the number of cycles where the processor is busy, L is the number of idle cycles, and C stands for the context switching. So the total time required to switch to a ready context, execute it until a remote reference is issued and process the reference is equal to R plus C plus L, and you can count the efficiency of linear region as N into R divided by the total time taken, which is R plus C plus L, where N is the value or the number of context, and it will be definitely below the saturation point. Okay, so as I said, as the number of contexts increases, your efficiency will also be increasing in a directly proportional manner, and that is the peculiarity of linear region. But when once you reach a particular value of n, you can see that after that point, even if you increase the number of contexts to something beyond n, you can see that the efficiency is slightly increasing, or you can say it remains the same or similar to what is achieved. So it is kind of saturated, and that region is called the saturation region. So when you talk about the linear region, you can see that the efficiency in the linear region, it is written as ELIN, E of linear region. So it is equal to number of contexts into the number of cycles where the processor is busy divided by the total number of cycles where the processor is busy, while it is switching, and while it is idle. So that gives the efficiency in the linear region. Now talking about the saturation region. So as I said, in the saturation region, the number of context or increase in the number of context will not make a significant change. Okay, so you can discard the value called n, and as the number of contexts increases, you can be so sure that the number of idle cycles will be moving to moving closer to 0. So you can also neglect the L value. Okay. So I repeat, in the case of saturation region, even if you increase the number of context, no significant changes will be there. So you can discard that value, which is N, that stands for the number of context. Now talking about the number of idle cycles in the CPU. When you have so many contexts available, the number of cycles where the processor is actually idle can be closer to 0. So that will also not make any significant changes. So you can discard the value of L also. Okay, so removing those two factors, you can rewrite the algorithm or rewrite the expression for efficiency as E saturation is equal to R divided by R plus C, where R is the number of busy cycles divided by C is the number of cycles spent for context switching plus the number of busy cycles, which means the total cycles are taken by the processor. So this can be written as 1 divided by 1 plus C by R, and that stands for the efficiency in the saturation region. Okay, so efficiency in the saturation region, as I said, it is independent of latency as well as it is independent of the number of contexts also. Now that completes our discussion on multiple context processors and their efficiency. So when you are given to design a particular multiple context processor, you have to understand how many contexts are there, what is the saturation point, and what can be the efficiency in the linear region, what can be the efficiency in the saturation region. You have to take a note of it and then analyze the performance of the processor. Now we'll move to the the fourth point of this module, the fourth major topic, which is parallelism. So we have to talk about fine-grained parallelism, but before that, we have to know what are the classifications that can be applied over a parallelism. Okay, so a parallelism, or the concept of exploiting parallel instructions or exploiting the parallelism between instructions, is broadly classified into three: fine-grained parallelism, coarse-grained parallelism, and medium-grained parallelism. So you would have probably heard about these terms: the coarse-grained, fine-grained, and medium-grained parallelism. So coarse-grained always stands for larger chunks or larger stones. Okay, so coarse grain is something where the particles are having a large size. Medium grained, as we know, medium grained, this particles will be of minimum size of a medium size. Okay, medium sized. You can take the example of coarse grained parallelism as the big stones that you actually see when you walk through a riverbed. They are coarse grains. Those tiny those medium sized stones that you see, they can be taken as the medium grained ones, and those so small grains that you can actually not pick one by one, rather you have to pick them as a group, they are called fine grained. So taking the same concept here, when you are going to have larger sized groups as one particle or one group, if the size of parallelism or the amount of parallelism is very low, which means you cannot pick many parallel instructions, maybe you have to limit them to 1, 2 or 2, 3, then such kind of a parallelism is called coarse grained parallelism. When you can slightly increase the number, that becomes medium grained parallelism. But when you are so sure that you can have n number of parallel instructions to be executed in the same time, that becomes fine grained parallelism. Okay, so it is this classification is going to be based on the amount of work which is performed by parallel task. Okay, so here the granule size is mentioned using the task. So if you have the instructions as taking as very big problem, okay, one single problem, one big task is being handled by one group, another big task is handled by another group, you cannot divide it. In that case, it is coarse grained. But if it is divisible but not too divisible, that becomes medium grained. But it is very simple and you can divide it into very small subtasks, then that becomes fine grained. Okay, so you can even express granularity in terms of the execution time. So if you're in the case of coarse grain, you will require more time to execute the task. In the case of medium grain parallelism, you will require slightly lesser than the coarse grained ones, but it is higher than the fine grained one. But in the fine grained parallelism, it will be so simple, the execution time will be too minimal, then that is fine grained parallelism. So our topic of discussion is fine-grained parallelism. So in fine-grained parallelism, as I said, the program is broken into a set of very small tasks. So these tasks can be assigned individually to many processors. You don't have to bother whether they are, if they are parallelly executable. If those subtasks are independent of each other, you can just give them or assign them to all the available processors. The amount of work associated with the parallel task is very low in the case of fine-grained parallelism, which means each task may require less data, each task may process less data, and each task may require less time from the processor. So the number of processors required to perform the complete processing is high. So as the number of subtasks increases, the number of processors required to execute them in parallel will also increase. So this may result in a communication and synchronization overhead. There are some examples like CM2, message-driven J machine, and Mosaic C. All these are examples of fine-grained parallel computers. We'll see some of the examples, the J machine, that we can actually perform a case study of that architecture later. Then in medium grained parallelism, which is actually not very much significant in your syllabus, but still in the case of medium grained parallelism, it is a compromise between fine grained and coarse grained parallelism. So the task size and communication time will be greater, where number of processors required will be low compared to fine grained parallelism, but it will be greater than coarse grained parallelism. Then this one, Intel IPSE 1 is an example of a medium grained parallel computer. Moving to coarse grained parallelism, as I said, the program will be split into larger tasks, which means you have to spend lot of time to execute it, whereas the number of processors required will be less, communication overhead will be less, traffic will be less, but what happens is you will have to spend a lot of time. There may be load imbalance, that which means some of the processor will be too occupied, whereas some processor can easily process the data, so there will be load imbalance. Certain tasks process a bulk of data, whereas others might be idle. Then the coarse grained parallelism failed to exploit the parallelism in the program because we are dividing it into larger chunks. Okay, you are dividing it into large tasks. Even if it is a subtask, it will be larger in size. So you cannot completely experience the efficiency of a parallelism. So what is the advantage? As I said, you will have lower number of processors, lower communication, and lower synchronization overhead. Okay, and Cray YMP is an example of a coarse-grained parallel computer. Now talking about the characteristics of parallel machines, first thing is latency analysis, where you talk about the communication latency. In the case of communication latency, it is a measure where measure of the data or message transfer time on a system interconnect. So all these devices, all these processors, memory modules, all of them are connected using some system interconnects. And what is the time taken for the transmission of data or message through this system interconnect corresponds to communication latency, and it is represented using TC. In Cray YMP, it will be the latency means it is the shared memory access time, whereas in CM2, it is the time required to send a 32-bit value across a hypercube network, whereas in IPSC 1 and J machine, it is corresponding to the latency in the network. Talking about the second characteristic, which is synchronization overhead. So synchronization overhead is the processing time required on a processor, any processor or processing element, or even a processing node of a multi-computer for the purpose of synchronization. So whenever you have to synchronize between the processing elements or their tasks, what is the time that you have to spend? That is corresponding to synchronization overhead, and it is taken as TS, and the total time for a parallel communication is TIPC is equal to TC, that is the communication latency, plus TS, that stands for the synchronization overhead. So these are some characteristics of parallel machines, or some features that you can use for analyzing the performance of parallel machines. Now I'll show you some comparisons between the machines. So here you can see this is actually taken from your standard reference. You can see it here that based on the communication latency, here you can see MIT J machine is actually a fine grain computer, Crave IMP is a coarse grain computer, Intel is a medium grain computer, the CM2 is also a fine grain computer. Whereas these are the characteristics that you can make use of in case of the communication latency. In the case of coarse grain, it is 40 nanoseconds, whereas in the case of fine grain computers, it is 2 microseconds, which is too high than a coarse grain supercomputer. So as we have already told, in the case of fine grain machines, you have to experience higher communication overhead. Similarly, in CM2, you can see it is actually connection machine 2, that is CM2. So in the case of connection machine 2, you have 600 microseconds per 32 bit. Okay. Whereas in the case of medium grain, it is 5 milliseconds. Okay. Then synchronization overhead corresponds to 20 microseconds in the case of a coarse grain computer Crave IMP, whereas in MIT J machine it is just 1 microsecond, whereas in CM2 that depends on the architecture. Okay, so in the case of CM2 you have to suffer 125 nanoseconds per bit slice operation, and in case of medium grain it was ranging up to 500 microseconds. Then the grain size, as we know, this is corresponding to 20, this is corresponding to 4 micro, this is 20 seconds, actually 20 seconds, this is 4 microseconds per 32 bit. In the case of medium grain it is 10 milliseconds, and in the case of J machine it corresponds to 5 microseconds. Then the concurrency or the degree of parallelism, DOP stands for degree of parallelism. You can see that you could exploit a parallelism up to 16. So 2 instructions to 16 instructions executed in parallel. Whereas in the case of fine grain parallelism computers, you can see it corresponds to 8,000 to 64,000 subtasks. In MIT J machine, it corresponds to 1,000 to 64,000 of instructions. Whereas in the case of medium grain computers, you had it ranging from 8 to 128. Okay, so these are various comparisons of architectures between coarse grain, medium grain, fine grain computers. So you can just understand and you can exploit all these comparisons. Maybe if you are asked to compare them in your university examinations. Talking about the grain size, which is represented using TG, as I said, the grain size means the execution time for a typical program. So that will include both the time taken to compute or execute the program and the communication required. Okay. So fine grain leads to higher degree of parallelism that we have already seen. It ranges from 8,000 to some 14,000 and so on. So it leads to higher degree of parallelism and higher communication overload, which means as the number of subtasks increases, the effort required to make them together, the effort required to communicate between them will also be high. So in the case of fine grain, it will be a higher degree of parallelism and higher communication overhead. So that is about fine grain parallelism and all the other types of parallelism. We have discussed about some 3 types of parallelisms and parallel machines, and then their characteristics, also a comparison of their characteristic with some examples. Now let's have a case study of MIT J machine, which is a fine grain computer. So it was proposed from MIT and it is named after them. So MIT J machine, J stands for Jelly Bean. So J machine or Jelly Bean machine, which was a computer, parallel computer designed by MIT. And the main building block of a J machine was a message driven processor. Okay, that is the main component of a J machine, which is actually a 36-bit microprocessor custom designed for a fine grain multicomputer. So this was actually a 36-bit microprocessor custom designed for a fine grain multicomputer, and it was having a main building block which was a message driven processor. Now let's see some of the features of J machine. So here we'll see what is a message driven processor. So MDP, it stands for message driven processor, and its function is that it executes the function, it responds to messages, which means you can actually make the processor execute using messages which is being sent to them. So this is actually done with the help of a dispatch mechanism, and MDP created a task for handling each arriving message. So each of the message that is being arrived, or each of the request that is being arrived, will be taken as, or will be converted into a task. Then MDP, it's nothing but a general purpose multi-computer processing node which provided communication, synchronization, and some naming mechanism to support fine-grained parallelism. So putting together, this is a microprocessor. This is a processor which is capable of handling fine-grained parallelism. So this was, as the name says, it was driven using messages. So whenever you have to make use of this processor, you have to make a request using messages, and the processor will take care of that message which was received, and it will be converted into a subtask or a task, and then it will be executed by the processor. So it was capable of handling the communication, it was capable of handling the synchronization, as well as some naming mechanisms, which means you have to significantly identify all these messages, all these subtasks. So each of them were actually named and then given for execution. So all of these was taken care by the MDP, or the message driven processor. So we will see how it was designed. Okay, so this actually appeared as a component with the following ports. So there was memory port, then there was six two-way network ports, then there was a diagnostic port. Then in the memory port, there was a direct interface with external DRAM. Okay. So in the memory port, there was 11 multiplexed address lines, 3 control lines, and 12-bit data lines. There was 11 multiplexed address lines, 3 control lines, and 12-bit data lines. So all of them putting together made the memory port of our MDP, and along with the memory port, there was 6 numbers of two-way network ports and a single diagnostic port. So this is the chip design of or the pinout diagram of MDP. As I said, there was a diagnostic port, there was this network port, and there was 6 two-way network ports. Okay, so this was the diagram. So you can see this is the memory port, these are the network ports, all these X, Y, Z and X plus Y plus Z plus, they represent the memory ports. Then you have, so there are 6 in numbers, then you have the diagnostic port, then you have the port which connects to the external DRAM, the memory port. So about this memory port, we have told that it has got multiplexed address lines, data lines, so and so. So that is corresponding to this particular port, the memory port, and this is the pinout of a message driven processor. Now about the network ports, as I said, they are 6 in numbers. So plus X and minus X corresponds to the first pair, plus Y and minus Y corresponds to the second pair, and plus Z and minus Z corresponds to the third pair. So they are actually arranged as a 3-dimensional mesh network, and each of the 6 ports corresponds to one of the 6 cardinal directions, like plus to the x-axis, plus to the y-axis, plus to the z-axis. Similarly, minus to the x-axis, which means to the negative, to the other side of x-axis, then minus to the y-axis and minus to the z-axis. So each port is directly connected to the opposite port on an adjacent MDP, which means this minus X will be directly connected to a plus X of the adjacent MDP. Similarly, this plus X will be connected to a minus X of the adjacent MDP. So that is how they are arranged about the network ports. Talking about the diagnostic port, it is actually, as the name says, it is for diagnosis. So it is going to issue all the supervisory commands. It is going to read and write the MDP memory from a console processor, and It is using this port a host can read or write any location in the MDP's address space. And you can use this particular port for resetting, interrupting, halting, or single step the processor. Okay, so all those supervisory or control commands are issued through the diagnostic port. So all these are the parts of an MDP processor. So you have diagnostic port, you have memory port, then you have network ports. All of them are having their own roles to perform. Now talking about the components of an MDP chip. Okay, so this was the pinout of an MDP chip. In the earlier figure, this was the pinout. Now we are going to talk about the components of an MDP chip. So in a conventional microprocessor, there would be a prefetch unit, control unit, register file, ALU or RALU, then memory blocks. Okay, so all those features, because this is a microprocessor, so all those features like prefetch unit, control unit, ALU, register file, then memory blocks, all of them are available in MDP also. Along with that, you will have something which corresponds to the network communication. So there will be network input and output interfaces, there will be routers, then there is something called address arithmetic unit. Since you have to handle all the subtasks, all the messages, all the addresses, then you have to have some address arithmetic unit. So it is going to perform all the addressing functions, and it is also available. Then it is also consisting of a DRAM interface, a control clock, and also a diagnostic interface. So this is the pictorial representation or the block diagram of a message driven processor, which is part of the J machine. So as I said, it has got a prefetch unit, it has got an address arithmetic unit, you have got an external memory interface, network input, network output, routers, memory, all those are available, and there are some buses to handle the data transmission. So this is the block diagram of a message driven processor. Now talking about the message format and routing. So J machine, as I said, it is a three-dimensional mesh, X, Y and X dimensions. So, and they are having two-way channels. So the X plus is connected to X minus, Y plus is connected to Y minus of the adjacent MDP. So this is kind of a three-dimensional mesh. And just like we have discussed about the hypercube routing, here also it is going to employ dimension order routing, which means you will have to route it based on the available three dimensions. And it is following the deterministic dimension order routing, which is the E-cube routing. So first it will be routed in the X dimension, then through the Y dimension, and then through the Z dimension. So you get the relevant destination. So since messages are routed in dimension order, messages running in the opposite direction along the same direction will not cause blocking, since you are routing them in the dimension order. Okay, so first it will go through the X direction, then through the Y direction, then through the Z direction. Even if they are having even if one is going to plus X and the other one is going to minus X, they will not make a blocking. Okay, so that is it will ensure that the network is always deadlock free. So this is one of the advantage of J machine, since it is following the three-dimensional mesh and dimension order routing, and it has got two-way, which means separate two-way what we say, the two-way directions, the two-way message transmissions. You can ensure that it is following the dimension order routing and it will not cause any blocking. With that, the network becomes deadlock free. Now to the last part of our discussion. This is a pictorial representation of how it is arranged. So here you can see the address arithmetic unit, and you have got a control. So the address arithmetic unit is available, the data path is available, it has got a control, so it takes care of the addressing. Then you have control, RALU control, registers. Then you have got a control clock, as we have discussed. Then this is the network input, output. This is the network input. It is connected to an external memory interface. You have diagnostic control. You have prefetch mechanisms. You have routers or through all the three directions, X direction, Y direction and Z direction. Then you have got the SRAM, which consists of 2048 words each, two blocks of SRAMs, and it is connected using an internal memory interface. So this is another pictorial representation of the same thing. This is a block diagram, whereas this is the layout of an MDP chip design. So that comes to an end of the case study on J machine. So you can make use of this and you can make notes of it. Thank you.